Wait, Hohoidap. In Jetua is a swapmoch, doch noch nachench, de galmoch squast, Ekanaawaaki. Alice Abbey is my colonial name. I am from the Sisquatmauluch. I attended the Sugarcane Indian Day School for 2 years. I'm a survivor of St. Joseph's Mission Indian Residential School, established in 1867. One day when my father came over to my mom's house, I was 9 years old. He asked my mom how come I wasn't in school, and that the Indian agent, Mr. Christie, told him that if I didn't go to school, white people would take me and she wouldn't see me anymore. So my dad took me over to St. Joseph's Mission. It was a really big white building. The nuns came and took me upstairs to the 3rd floor. They took all my clothes off, took me to the washroom, the bathroom, and then they cut my hair and they put DDT in my head. And then they took me over to the big room where there's lots of showers, and they washed me. Then they brought me over to my bed and told me that this was my bed, that my number was 45. There was no names. My number was 45. They gave me their clothes and their shoes. If I disobeyed, there was punishment and there was hell. At nights, for the longest time, I was really afraid. I was really scared. There was just so much fear instilled in me that at night I would crawl under all of those beds to my sister's bed. She was a junior then. And I would ask her to please don't sleep before me, and I'd fall asleep with her. In the morning, Sister Juliet would come and she'd have her cowbell and her whistle or her stick, and she would just put on all the lights, and we'd hear all of this noise, and she'd come over to my sister's bed and she'd start hitting my sister, and she'd hit her with the cowbell sometimes because I wasn't allowed to be in her bed. From being hit so many times and my hair pulled, my right ear, it started to leak. There was some liquid coming out of my ear, and Sister Joseph took me up to the swaying room, and she put my head sideways with my hair, and she took this bottle and she was pouring it in my ear, and it was really cold, and it was pure rubbing alcohol. I could taste it, and it just burned, and I just grabbed my head and I just screamed and stomped my feet, and I'd really start trying to get the alcohol out of my ear, and she would be slapping me and pulling my hair, and I'd get up to go out, and one time, there was many times, one time I turned around and I looked and there was another girl. She came in after me and she sat down, and Sister Joseph pulled her head over and started pouring that, and I was watching her and she did the same thing. She was just really pushing her on her ear and screaming. And I was watching because I was thinking maybe it wasn't supposed to hurt. Maybe it was me. Maybe it wasn't supposed to hurt anybody. And in grade 6, Miss Bojme, she went over and she really sharpened her pencils, really sharp, and she walked over to where I was sitting and she just stabbed me right here, and she broke her pencil, and she kept telling me right, and told me that I was being punished. And I still have that lead in my shoulder today. I lost hearing in my right ear, and when they operated, they cut it and they tried to fix it, and I was gone away in this Indian hospital in Sardis called Sardis, and my mom didn't know where I was. I was gone for a whole year. And when I came back, that's what Miss Boschme did to me. And then I went to be a senior, and Sister Anne Rosario, it just seemed like she was strapping me all the time. Like she would strap me with all the girls with a really long leather strap that you sharpened shaving blades for shaving, men shaving. And she would come up over her head, and then she would come down on our arms, and we had to kneel in front of her with both of our arms out. And sometimes my hands and my arms would be swollen and aching, and I'd try to go in the bathroom and soak them in a sink with cold water. But she'd come behind me and she'd hit my head on the sink and tell me, get out. Sister Juliet, when I was a little girl, she was in juniors, and one time I was saying tlak, tlak in Indian in my loan language, and we're trying to say coming, coming. She came over and she told me to stick my tongue out, and pulled my head back, and I stuck my tongue out, and she came an upper punch under my chin, and I really bit my tongue, and she said, that's a devil's language. You don't use out language. You're going to go to hell. You have to obey. And I was eyewitness to sexual abuse. There was this garage that wasn't very far from the building, and I heard some noise in there, so I snuck over there, and I was peeking in there. And the priest was in there with a girl, and he had his private parts in her mouth, and he had her hair pulled down, and she was kneeling in front of him. And the same girl used to pee her bed all the time, and the nuns would tie her hands and her feet to her bed and ridicule her and have the other girls laugh at her. And she ended up with a really bad arm. Like, they used a needle on her. When they'd give us needles, they used the same needle on her, and she ended up with this really big sore on her arm, and it just kept getting bigger and bigger, and you could see the bone. And she used to walk around, and you could smell it. And she's the girl that used to pee the bed all the time, and she had a nervous breakdown. And right to today, she is very afraid to get the COVID vaccine. There were some girls that tried to run away, but they were made examples of. They were really brutalized. They got their heads shaved bald, and they were beaten. And we had these lockers with our numbers on it, and they were rectangular lockers. And those girls used to try to crawl in there, like they tried to squeeze in there and hide, because they really were being brutalized and ridiculed. There were no doctors, there were no nurses for any kind of anything like illness or anything over there. There was no nutrition. Our food was, at times it smelled like the porridge was rotten, like they had rotten meat in there. There was meat in our porridge, and they used to have prunes, those rotten prunes in our porridge. But if we didn't eat it, they would give it to us for lunch. This was every day for 7 years, and much, much more. This is just the tip of the iceberg. The Canadian state statutory laws and Christianity, they forcibly removed children from their families and their communities. This testimony from myself is a squat noch and a survivor of residential school or prison. This is only minimal of what my people have experienced and were subjected to in these prisons. They were numbers, no names. The Canadian state perpetuates its image to the world that they are a leader in human rights, a leader in reconciliation. They want global security and prosperity, a more just, inclusive, and sustainable world. Indigenous grassroots people know this is false and they're lies. The Canadian state in its jurisprudence subscribes to the doctrine of discovery, the papal bull, the domination and the dehumanization of Indigenous peoples and children. I realize and I know that there are brave and strong rapporteurs that report and make recommendations based on fact. We give you inner strength, lasso yoch joch, to do what you see is right, based on what you see, based on determination, assimilation, and genocide of Indigenous people, based on fact. Indigenous peoples, citizens, and intergenerational survivors of these Indian residential school prisons to call on Canada to take action and repeal and revoke the doctrine of discovery, the papal bulls of 1452. I encourage the United Nations to act with genuine results. This intergenerational genocide we are still suffering with nowhere else to go for help. The United Nations can request a Canadian state delegation of Indian residential school prisons survivors of torture, degradation, termination, genocide to testify before the United Nations Human Rights Tribunal. Kochjam, Kosaltens, Kochjam.